Welcome back to Patman Garage. So we got a little bit different uh, vehicle working on today. It's a E450 2003 with a V10, and it's got a check engine light on. Has codes for a couple different sensors, and we're gonna see if we can't fix what Ford couldn't fix. So Ford condemned the PCM. They put a PCM in it, and still didn't fix the PCM. And then I got involved. And shortly after I looked at the diagrams, then I figured out pretty much immediately what we're going to be after looking at, trying to find. So I'm going to take y'all through a little bit of diagnosis here and looking at the wiring diagrams and show you why it's not a computer. All right, so jumping into our vehicle here. So in my engine codes, I have a P1289, a P0708, and a P0123. So those are going to be my cylinder head temperature, my transmission range sensor, and throttle pedal position. So what I did was print off all the diagrams, and I started tracing where those sensors go. So here's my cylinder head temperature sensor, and it gets voltage from the powertrain control module through the sensor and then out through onto another diagram page, which goes to U. And so here's where U comes back in, and U gets onto this through this splice joint, which is shown horizontally, but it's all three wires connected or multiple wires connected together. And on that same splice joint over here, we have, hey, look, a throttle pedal position sensor and a digital transmission range sensor. So our cylinder head temperature sensor, throttle position, and transmission sensor, all three of these are going into one splice joint and then go to diagram O, which our diagram O, let's see here. 2 pages back, right? Yeah, on 75. So diagram O is here, and it goes through another splice joint to P, and we go back to another page, and P comes back to our signal return, back to the powertrain control module. So the reason why I know it's not a computer, other than obviously they've done that, but I would not have recommended a computer if I was the first one looking at this, because some of my other stuff, my transmission sensors here, and there's some other stuff on this page. So oxygen sensors, so all of these all these sensors are working correctly. The oxygen sensors are getting a correct ground through here, and the oxygen or the transmission, other sensors on transmission are all going through this same ground. So since I don't have codes with those sensors, I know that the powertrain control module, the ground is good, the computer itself is good, and up to this splice joint is good. So I don't need to look at this wire or this splice joint other than where this wire comes out of the splice joint. So go back to this page here. So more than likely what I need to find is this splice joint here, which is S157. So we're going to do some more research, figure out where S157 is. So let's see here. And I printed these out so these are easier to manage flipping through, because they're all individual pages online, which makes it a lot more difficult to actually look at when they're all when they're all kind of throwing one page at a time, it's a little harder to jump around when versus physical pages. So you got to load each one, and it's just easier to flip through pages, in my opinion. So we were looking for, let's see if I printed that. Okay, we're looking for 137. Is that what I said it was? Okay, so we were looking for S157. Excuse me. So 157 here is on this page, already highlighted, and it doesn't give me an exact location, but it gives me a near the connector C1204, which I had looked up previously. So that is going to be on the engine bay, left-hand side near the center. So they also have these other engine bay layout pictures, which are kind of showing, general layout of where stuff is. So that's the big engine harness connector that goes from the main body harness into the engine, the top of the engine harness. So we can start looking at the harnesses in that area. So it's going to involve swapping or cutting open some harnesses and figuring out where that splice joint actually is, because this particular diagram doesn't give us a good amount of information. Some manufacturers' diagrams and even some later Ford diagrams will give you a specific location of 300 millimeters or whatever away from a connector. This just says near connector. So we'll have to do a little bit of kind of manual digging, unfortunately. But I kind of wanted to show the game plan going into it before we really get deep into the truck. And then I just go, hey, look, here's the problem. Kind of wanted to show a little bit of the thought process going into it and why we're looking at what we're looking at. So we're going to go over the truck and take a peek at it. All right, so we got the hood opened up, and this is where it sucks because it's a van and there's no access to anything. So one of the splices might have been up in here, and right off the bat I already see somebody's been in here before, and there's some loose wiring and some stuff that's maybe been cut up and capped off, and there's some little labels in here. So actually this is a whole aftermarket wiring that goes to the battery. So it's possible we got something going on here. I'm probably going to go and pull the intake tube off just to get a little bit more space in here to see what we got going on. We do also have the dog house in the floor of the van we can pull off, that we can get access to the back of the motor from inside the van. So we'll see what we can come up with. All right, well, I got the intake tube and fresh air inlet out of the way, and obviously got my doghouse removed there. So just kind of getting a lay of the land here. Actually, most of the visibility is actually better from the inside doghouse side. So we'll take a look from over here. All right, so from back here, we have our oxygen sensors, or the green connectors. Now we know from what we looked at earlier on the diagram that those are getting the ground signal correct from the PCM. So the engine harness runs this direction around to where it actually plugs into the body harness on the frame. So more than likely our splice is going to be from here forward. Now the actual location said near 1204, which was one of the fuel injectors back here. One of the back two, I don't remember which one. So according to our diagram, somewhere in this ballpark area is where our splice is at for that ground wire. So I will probably just start from here and work my way that way until I find it. So I'm going to get a razor blade. We'll cut back some insulation and start pulling the harness apart and see what we can find. I will probably see if I can get this guy. It's just an intake tube and a silencer or something. Actually, that's idle air. I'll probably get that guy out of the way just to give me a little more room right here for my hands. So that's the game plan. Oh, also, side note, this van's a 2003, and it looked like it got a motor in 2015. Well, the motor is from 2015, but it might have been done in 16 or 17. But looks like it's got a newer motor in it, so that's good. All right, so to get a little bit deeper in this thing, just kind of again showing you, I showed you my oxygen sensors down here. This is my throttle position sensor, which I believe is what the throttle code is for. I don't think we actually have. I believe this is a mechanical driven throttle cable. So there's no throttle position sensor on the gas pedal. It's just a cable. So this is our sensor we got a problem with, and then the cylinder head temperature sensor should be up in that area. And I'm honestly not sure exactly where the range sensor comes into play. It's somewhere down in here, but at least the cylinder head and the throttle position sensor come together in the harness, again in the same area where we're looking. So that's the plan. We're going to start tearing into this and see what we can find. All right, got my harness unloomed or untaped and unloomed, and now I need to dig a little deeper and get into the actual harness itself inside the loom. So I'm going to make a careful incision back here in the tape, and then I'm just going to spiral the tape off and see what we can come up with. Alrighty, so I got more harness unraveled and climbing back in here. So this is the first splice joint we're after. It is on the gray wire with a red tracer, right in here. So actually ended up being pretty close to the area we were looking for. Obviously didn't need to pull all this out, but that's okay. We found it. So I'm gonna try to get the camera in here, but see right here, there's a splice joint. Give you a little zoom here. All right, a little splice joint here. So that's gonna be my first point of doing some electrical testing. I'm gonna check on the two wires on this side of the splice joint and see if I have a ground. If I do, then the splice joint itself is bad. And if I don't have a ground, then that means a different splice joint further down the line is bad. So we're going to get in here with the meter and see what we can find as far as continuity. And if it's indeed this bad splice joint, then it should be a pretty quick repair overall. We'll have to pull a little bit more harness out and then repair the wiring and then get it all right back up. All right, so my initial testing here is that splice joint is good. I'm not going to tape anything up until, or even start putting stuff back together until I actually fix the problem. So we're going to move on to another splice joint and see what we can find. Now, this is real interesting here. So at the beginning of the video, I talked about how there's wiring spliced up or modified and chopped up here. Now, one of the wire I'm after is a gray with a red stripe, and there's a giant splice joint right here, which is actually one of the ones I'm looking for. So what I think might have happened is somebody was chasing a problem, cut this wire, and grounded it to battery, which is going to basically do the same thing that the PCM was doing. But if they cut the wrong wire and grounded it in the wrong spot, then they might have inadvertently opened the circuit for the three sensors we got a problem with. So I'm going to do a little bit of digging in this harness here, but we may have found the problem before we realized it was the problem. So what I really need to do is pull off or find the other end of this wire that was cut off and do some testing to figure out where that goes, because this very well could be my problem, that somebody thought they were being helpful. Well, you never know what you're going to get into when you start with an older van like this, and other people have been working on it. So let me show you all what I found now. All right, so jumping back in here. So we talked about this gray wire that has been spliced to red, and then for some reason red then goes to the negative terminal on the battery. So somebody was on the right track and knew they had a problem with this wire. And so in case the computer was the problem, they cut the wire and provided a ground, which is what the computer does, is grounds all those wires out, and they stopped. So that would have been good for a diagnostic step if you were trying to eliminate the PCM as a variable. However, that doesn't eliminate all those splice joints we talked about. So if this splice joint right here is the bad one, and I can roll this so you can see all the wiring here. So we have this one wire, which is the one that's spliced and modified in this bundle here, goes to multiple ground wires into the harnesses. So if this part right here is bad, whenever they bypassed the computer and provided a ground to it, then all they did was provide the same ground to the same wire, which was already good, and then it stops and is bad here. So I have not done any testing here. We're going to hopefully find out that this is our problem. So we're going to do a little bit of testing here and see what we can come up with. All right, well, electrical diagnosis confirms this splice joint is totally fine. So I'm now 0 and 2. So now I need to find the third splice joint that we were looking for and do some more testing. All right, I got more of it opened up. So the one that I originally tested down here, which has the red wire attached to it, this is 137 and this is 136. They're near each other, and obviously it just makes it so they're not a giant bundle, but we need to do some electrical testing on this guy and see what's going on. But like I said before, from the diagram, and I'll show you why this doesn't actually really make sense, but I'll show you once we get back into the toolbox and show you the diagrams of why this was probably a kind of a bad diagnostic step or bad repair. Obviously it didn't fix it, but we'll do some testing up here and see if this is our problem. Well, my turn to eat a little humble pie. I just found out the problem. So in retrospect, it's always easy to, see this after the fact, but in my mind, it was a splice joint before I even did any real testing on the car, because of having multiple sensors in common with each other. But turns out all the splice joints are good. So I did a little bit of diagnosing and tearing apart that I didn't need to do, but you will never believe what the problem is. So I went back and looked at the diagram again and followed and traced all the wires of what they had in common with, that those three problem areas have in common with each other. And they go through connector C134. So I went ahead and pulled out the connector to see what's going on see if I could do, testing one side of the connector or the other. And here's what I found. So this is connector C134, which is the engine harness. Basically, it's the engine harness that's attached to the engine. And then the other side of it is the same body harness that I was playing with over here. So two of the splice joints are on this side of the connector, and one of the splice joints is on the engine side of the connector. And so I grabbed my little 10mm here, zipped off my connector, and then I flipped it around, and lo and behold, what do we find in there? A mangled up pin. So that mashed up pin is our problem. So we have an open circuit on that wire, and we need to take this connector apart and figure out how we can fix that pin so it can go back into our connector over there. So a little bit of humble pie, because like I said, I had kind of mentally diagnosed the car before I even got into it, and you never know what you're going to find. But in this case, I was wrong initially. But that's part of the diagnosis, is you don't know what is good and bad until you actually test stuff for yourself. So, you know, in retrospect, it probably would have been easier to just go pull the connector off instead of digging for splice joints. But, you know, that was my experience leading me down the path of saying it was a splice joint when it wasn't. So, chalk this up to a little bit of learning experience, and we'll get into actually repairing this and figuring out what's going on, figuring out how to fix it. Well, I ended up being able to very gently straighten that pin up enough that we got a good connection out of it. It's not the best repair in the world, but I think it'll hold for what we're trying to do with this. So now I am going to go ahead and undo this connection and go back to the PCM connection, and that way we can get rid of this extra little red wire and get it back to factory. So we're going to fix that, and we'll start taping everything back up, and then we'll see how she does. So here's the simplified recap. This is the entirety of the diagram we were playing with here. And so this was the first splice joint we checked. This was the second splice joint we checked. This is the third splice joint we checked. And then the repair attempt was run here to ground, like that. So that did basically nothing that different than what the PCM is supposed to be doing, which, like I said, would be a valid test to eliminate the opportunity for the PCM to be the problem, but you can't stop when it doesn't actually fix the problem. So our problem ended up being this guy on this connector with that bent pin. So wrapping up on this guy, kind of learning experience. Everything's always a learning experience, and it's how you choose to overcome and learn from it. So I'm glad I got this thing fixed. It's happy. All the codes are gone. Truck runs, I mean, reasonably well for a truck with 300,000 miles on it, and it'll live to see another day without a check engine light. So appreciate y'all hanging out with me for a video. Be easy on me in the comments. But yeah, so we'll get back to work on some other vehicles, and I'll take y'all along where I can. So I appreciate you, and I will catch you in the next one.